let's talk about rental arbitrage first, which is for typically if you don't have that much capital to start. Rental arbitrage is a great way to start on Airbnb. All the other principles for market research apply when you're either buying or doing rental arbitrage. And there's a third, another option, which I'll talk about as a bonus in just a few minutes here. But I want to talk about what is Airbnb rental arbitrage. Airbnb rental arbitrage is when you approach a landlord, you find a property that's listed on, Zillow, Realtor.com, anywhere online, and you approach the landlord and you say, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, I have a corporate leasing company, and essentially what you're doing is locking in a 12, 18, 24-month lease, and then with the landlord's permission, you are relisting that property on Airbnb, VRBO, Booking.com, get those bookings, and then you're generating your revenue. So, for example, let me tell you how this works. Let's say you find a property for $3,000 a month, right? $3,000. Let me use another marker. 3,000, right? So your rent is $3K. Let's say you've got another $500 in utilities, right? So all your expenses, internet, landscaping, let's say you have a pool. Let's call it another, let's just call it another $500 in expenses. So all in, you're at $4,000 a month, per month. Then you go list it on Airbnb, and once you've done the proper research and you've got all the amenities and you've got the right property and you've done the rest of the steps that we're going to talk about, that property could be generating, let's say, $8,000 a month on average, right? I'm making these numbers up as we go to give you the idea. So simple math here, right? After your expenses, you're left with $4,000 a month in profit. You don't own the property. You didn't have to put much down. Now, let me tell you the costs of what it typically costs to get into Airbnb rental arbitrage. But right out the gate, you're looking at your rent, your utilities, landscaping fee, maybe a pool maintenance person, and let's call it $4K. But then you're left with whatever difference you make is your profit, okay? You don't have to, now what are the pros of this? You don't have to go buy a house. You have less risk because you don't own the property. And it's a great way to build cash flow, start out, learn the ropes of Airbnb. And once you accumulate all of that experience and you accumulate all the cash, then you can go out and become an actual property owner and list those on Airbnb and rent those out as well. So what does it typically cost to start on rental arbitrage? So with rental arbitrage, you typically have to put, since you're getting a longer term lease, you need the security deposit, which I also teach you how to negotiate so that you can actually get a couple of weeks, even a month of free rent. Yes, it's possible. And what you do need is funds for furnishing the property and getting the property ready. So depending on where you are, what city, how big the property is, on average, my students are looking at anywhere from so let's say $15,000 to start, okay? 10 to 15K. Just, yeah. 10 to 15K in furniture. This is for 3-bed to 4-bed, 2 to 3 baths, right? And of course, if you have an outdoor, you're furnishing the outside. But all of this is done online. You order all of that, all that furniture online. You can look at Amazon is a great place, especially when you're just starting out. You don't need to be fancy. You really don't need to be fancy with all the furniture, because what is important is your design. I'm going to get into this in the future, but let's just talk about startup costs. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Amazon, furniture, Wayfair, we'll come back to these. Some great places to just start out. And then later, if you're in a more luxury market, maybe you can order some nicer pieces from other places. But really you want quality, not anything too expensive, because you can have quality without paying too much money. So this is your startup costs, all right? And then, I know you have to get your LLC, which costs a couple $100, right? LegalZoom. So you've got your furniture. Let me just write this again. Startup costs are costs You have your furniture, which is, let's call it 10,000 to 15,000, right? And your LLC, which is a couple $100, which you can just use LegalZoom or any one of these online services, and you can just lock in your LLC, and that makes you a professional and legal business, which also allows you to look more professional in the eyes of all the landlords, and it protects you legally as you're conducting business. So these are the startup costs for rental arbitrage. Now, you can even save a lot of money here if the property comes furnished. A lot of people are renting their properties already furnished, and all you'll have to do is come in and maybe you can enhance the furniture or add some amenities, and then you can really slash this cost even more. So that's kind of a hack, but the furniture has to be pretty good and it has to match. There has to be a nice vibe when you're looking. So part of your research, by the way, when you're selecting properties, is you want to make sure that your property is at least as nice or nicer than the surrounding properties on Airbnb. So you're also going to do that research on AirDNA, as I mentioned earlier, and you're going to go on Airbnb.com to the area where you're looking at properties and compare the properties that are doing the best. Okay? And what do I mean by properties doing the best? So on top of AirDNA showing you certain gross numbers and all the metrics that they have, you're personally going to go to Airbnb.com, find properties in your area, and you're going to see how booked are the calendars. Okay, so you can get an idea. So just comparatively, if you look at one property and it's booked, quite well in advance, then they're doing something right. And you want to look at what exactly type of furniture and amenities they have and what the demographic is that goes there. For example, if your area is known for golf tournaments or tennis tournaments, maybe you want let's stick to the golf, right? You want a little mini golf range or a little putt-putt or a driving range. So for example, a couple of my properties are in some golfing areas. So I have a mini driving range and a putt-putt over in the side of the house in the yard, and people love that. So golfers come and they just, they're in the yard hitting the balls and they book the property just for that. So you want to know your demographic as part of the research that you're doing. Okay, so this is the startup cost for arbitrage. And what I also want to talk a little bit about, and that brings me to getting your first booking in 24 to 48 hours. So here's where all of your hard work pays off. And if you've followed all of these steps, step by step, this is the most exciting part. I remember when I got my very first booking, it was a complete game changer and motivated me to work harder and continue scaling. So this is what you're going to experience if you follow all of these steps, step by step. All right. So thank you for watching. And for those of you that want to work with me one-on-one, make sure you click the link in the description and apply and see if you qualify. I work with a few students every single month where I personally walk you through this entire process step by step until you get your first property and even scale out to multiple properties depending on whatever your goal is. Be great.